Good afternoon, everyone. It's Pablo.zuanic, cannabis analyst at Zuanic Associates. I have the pleasure of welcoming the chairman of Curaleaf, Boris Jordan. Boris, welcome.
Good to be here, Pablo.
And again, thank you for taking the time. Look, we have a lot to cover. We're going to go through Europe. Hemp, we'll discuss, of course, the US, what's happening there on the rescheduling and the legal side of things. And then, of course, I've been paying attention to all the questions that we received through the Zoom chat room, through email, and of course, also through Twitter. So just start sending us your questions. So Boris, let's start on Europe. We were at Cannabis Europa last week. You sounded quite bullish about the outlook. Just elaborate. And I guess the way, to frame it, if I just think of Germany, Czech, Poland, and the UK, 2% population penetration, $200 a month, that's a $10 billion market, right? So opportunity is sizable, and you're, of course, correct to be bullish about Europe. First, USMSO to enter the market there. But just help us frame how these markets grow over the next 2 years and what things have to happen in those 4 markets for us to get to a 2% penetration from right now, 0.1% or lower in some of those countries. Thanks.
Thanks, Pablo. Well, Europe is no different than any other market, right? Europe today is somewhere where we were approximately 5 years ago. So it's going to take, education and awareness building in that market to get it to that level. If you think about Florida, for instance, I think it took us about 5 years to get to the 2+ better penetration rates that we're seeing in that market. So I think, realistically speaking, to get to those penetration levels, it's going to take some considerable time. Let's call it, 2 to 5 years. I think that, however, you're right, it's going to be a very sizable market. But on the other hand, it's a better market than the US because it's got regulations that come from the top down, so everybody knows exactly where they stand. Mm-hmm. And you have, in some cases like Germany, you have, cannabis has been removed from the narcotics list. That helps it tremendously as well. And more importantly, you don't have to build, the capex in this market is much lower because you don't have to build the same amount of facilities as you do in the United States. You don't have to build in every single country. You can operate from one centralized location for growing, packaging, manufacturing, and then distribute from that location. So your capex is lower, your rules are more transparent, and the market TAM is actually bigger, right? You got over 700 million people in Europe. So I'm very excited about it, and I think it's going to be a really interesting market, but it's going to take a little time to develop.
Right. And on that point, if you take the next 2 years in terms of those 4 markets, which one would be the most bullish that you're on, taking a 2-year view? Germany, Czech, Poland, UK.
Up until recently, was the fastest growing market for us was the UK, but now obviously that has definitely changed to Germany. I think we've seen almost 100% increase in patient count in Germany in the last 3 months over the previous quarter. And so I think that's showing that Germany is going to be the faster growing market of all of them, mainly because of the removal of cannabis from the narcotics list, and the fact that now it can be used as a primary medicine rather than a secondary medicine. I think that's very important. Plus, you don't need specialist doctors. Any doctor can now prescribe. So that obviously has liberated that market tremendously. So Germany is definitely going to be the fastest growing market. But UK is also a very strong market, but more limited.
Right. And in the case of Germany specifically, any bottlenecks that you're seeing here on the supply chain or even on the demand side, whether pharmacies fulfilling prescriptions, enough inventory in the market, imports being delayed, maybe people didn't stock up in time, the wholesalers, any bottlenecks that you've seen in this 2Q so far? Or maybe not.
There's one major bottleneck, and that is the pharmacies, right? There's very few pharmacies that have built out the infrastructure. Now, in Germany, unlike many other countries in the world, there are no pharmacy chains. The most any one pharmacist can own is 3 pharmacies. Right. So there are 18,000, call it independent pharmacies. Those pharmacies are largely small mom and pop pharmacies like we used to have in the United States, 25 years ago. And so these pharmacies don't have the infrastructure to repackage, because what they have to do is they receive the orders, then they have to repackage them. That's the rule. And so they have to show that they're actively working with the medicine. And that makes the fact that they just can't handle the demand. So the good news is the demand is overwhelming the pharmacies. But on the bad side is that's definitely slowing sales slightly because they just don't have the infrastructure to build out the facilities. And the facilities have to be within call it a 20-minute distance from the pharmacy. So they have to rent facilities, they have to build out the infrastructure. So there is some level of bottleneck on that. And I would say that's the main bottleneck. The other one is really awareness, education, and doctors. That's the last one. But that one is really making progress. We're seeing more and more doctors sign up. We're seeing more and more awareness. We're seeing the demand. As I said, we had a 100% increase in patient growth just in 3 months over the first quarter. I mean, we had 120,000 patients at the end of the first quarter. Now we're definitely up 100,000 on top of that. So, almost 100% growth. And I think we're going to continue seeing that. But there is this bottleneck in the pharmacies, which is being worked on. And many, many pharmacies are starting to raise money and starting to build this up. But there is that bottleneck.
That's right. And then just to be clear, in terms of, the barriers to entry, you bought EMAG, you bought 420 Pharma later. The markets in Europe seem to be quite consolidated. So it's not so simple for people to just come in, right? Although you go to a conference like Cannabis Europa, and we see so many people from various countries trying to ship into Germany. Maybe talk in general about the barriers to entry and about the strength of your franchise in Germany specifically.
So I truly believe that we are maybe the only, maybe there's a couple of others, there's Bedrochem, but we're really the only fully integrated cannabis company operating in Europe today with full operations, both growing, manufacturing, processing, distribution, and sales in the German market. And so that's very difficult to replicate. It takes time. You have to have, your facilities have to be EU GMP certified. To get an EU GMP certification is at least a year for a facility after you build it, and that sometimes is even longer. You have to also register every single strain and every single product, which usually takes almost a year to get done. Now, there are people that are trying to cut corners there, but the regulators will go after them. But if you follow the rules, it's very, very difficult, and there is a bit of a moat around Europe, at least for the next, I would say, 12 to 18 months. I do expect, however, more and more players to get there and for it to be more competitive. But I think for the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to be very difficult to replicate what Curaleaf has in Europe.
Are you surprised that you are so far the only MSO that has invested, actively in Europe? It seems that you are way ahead of the curve, and rightly so.
Pablo, you know that we've received a lot of criticism early on when we made this investment 3 years ago. But I was looking forward. I know the European market. I spent the better part of my career in Europe rather than the United States. And so for me, it was kind of a decision I wanted to make. I knew how large the market opportunity was. And, we got lucky. One could have argued I was too early, but it so happened to be we were just on time, right? We were able to put the whole supply chain, register all the products, get all our distribution in place, get good people in place. And now we're taking advantage of that. I think, as I said, you'll start to see real growth out of that market going into the second half of the year.
Right. And here, I'm not going to ask you to comment on your competitors, but congratulations, because here you built a franchise that's as strong or stronger than some of the other large global cannabis companies have been there for 10 years, right? And here you are pretty much with near or quasi leadership in Germany. So,
well, again, I think there's some foresight, but there's also some luck in that. A lot of the other companies, particularly the Canadians, thought that market was going to be bigger earlier on. They couldn't go into the US market anyway with their licenses, so they went to Europe, and they invested a little bit too early. In the case of Curaleaf, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. In this case, we got it right.
Right. Look, and here, just digging into the weeds a little bit in terms of your supply chain in Europe, do you plan to apply for a cultivation license in Germany, or do you plan to keep your supply from Canada and Portugal?
No, we won't be. Germany, especially after the start of the Ukraine war and the cutoff of Russian gas, German energy costs have gone through the roof. German social costs are very expensive. You literally cannot make money, given where margins are in Europe, manufacturing or growing in Germany. So we have no plans at this point in time to do it. Most of the growers that did build those facilities are losing money on them or shutting them down. Portugal is a very good climate. It's also a very good cost place to do things, right? You can get labor at a very, very good price. And Canada, as you know, we bought a ready-made, purpose-made facility with registered products and EU GMP certification. So we're in a good place between our Portuguese facility and our German, and we can make. Our Portuguese facility can do up to 25,000 pounds. We can do about 2,000 today out of our indoor. We can grow. We can almost triple that over the next year if we want to. But as we've said, our strategy is to have 50% of our own product and 50% that we would be buying in. And we're right there right now. And we know that we can continue to meet European demand for several years going forward. And then if we have to expand beyond that, we will.
And that's a great point, because I mean, I find that some companies are too stuck on their own supply, right? And here you're saying you probably buy half of your product, your end product from others, and the other half from your own supply. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You want to have a variety of strains and products in the market.
Absolutely. That's absolutely a strategy. Plus, that also helps you with price fluctuations, right? There are times in these markets where you've got too much product and you can buy it cheaper than you can manufacture, particularly from desperate sellers of product that may be having financial problems. So from our perspective, we're finding it very, very good to have that balance of 50% of our own product and 50% supplied by other companies.
Right. And what about the arguments some people make that Germans want to buy German product, that they want to buy something that says made in Germany, or that doesn't apply to cannabis in your opinion?
That's not what they're doing today, that's for sure. They're buying product from all over the world, from Africa, from Canada, from Portugal, from everywhere. Yeah.
All right. And then just briefly, in terms of 420 Pharma, congrats again, great investment. I'm sure you talked to many other candidates, but why was 420 Pharma the right candidate when you bought them? You bought 50% plus 2 years ago. Just remind us, why were they the right partner for Curaleaf?
I always believe, and one thing I've learned in both the things I've done right and wrong is people make businesses. The two gentlemen that were running 420 Pharma are consummate entrepreneurs. They've built several companies before this very successfully. They built this business. They needed, the Curaleaf infrastructure in order to take them to the next level. So it was a match that worked for both sides, and that's very important. So it's a very, very good partnership. As you know, we own 55%. They own 45%. We have a call option to buy out the rest of that stake at the end of next year, which we will certainly be doing. And so we're very, very comfortable with the position. We're very comfortable with the team. They've been very good partners with us, and they built a very successful brand and business in Germany, and we're one of the leaders in that market.
Right. And regarding NGC, particularly in Canada, can you talk about, what you said you're funding some of their expansion? Can you elaborate in terms of, where are they in terms of capacity and how big can they become? NGC.
So NGC was very important to us. 420 Pharma was buying almost 100% of their capacity through NGC. Most of the NGC capacity was going to Germany through 420 Pharma. And so one of the things we realized when we bought 420 Pharma was that we were basically paying NGC call it a 25 to 30% margin for buying their product and then reselling and repackaging and reselling under our brand in Europe. The other thing we realized is that NGC didn't have capital. They kept coming back to Curaleaf asking us to finance the build out of further grow rooms. So finally, we realized, why are we financing this company? Why are we paying a 30% margin? Let's just buy them. And so we came to a mutual agreement and we bought them into the company. And now we have increased our margins dramatically because of the fact that we control it. And we now have a fully EU GMP certified indoor facility that can export into Europe. So we got it at a discounted price to what was put into the facility. So the timing was very good. The price was very good. And strategically, it made all the sense in the world to do it.
And just in the case of Canada, so NGC, the idea is to help expand them, but would you look at other suppliers in Canada also that you could acquire down the road?
Yeah, so NGC, besides its own product, does buy in from other suppliers in Canada, so we will continue to do that. But we will not be, it's unlikely that we'll be buying any more operators in Canada because NGC has a lot of expansion space, more than we need. And so we're going to expand that facility. But that doesn't mean that we won't be buying in product from other facilities, just like NGC has been doing, because NGC has the EU GMP certification, which allows it to buy in, repackage the product, and then sell it on, which is very important.
Right. And then just one question in terms of disclosure. And again, thanks to Curaleaf for the way you disclose your international business. You split wholesale revenue, retail revenue. First quarter, 7.5 million in retail revenue in international. Is that just the UK clinics or is there something else there?
That's the UK clinics, because that's the only place where we sell directly to the consumer, right? In Germany, we're still a wholesaler, although watch the tape. We intend to look at other options there. And in Poland also, we're a wholesaler. In Poland, you can't be a retailer, but we are. But in the UK, we are both a wholesaler and a retailer as well.
Right. Look, and here I'm just going to weave in some questions that come through the Twitter feed related to Europe. in the case of what they call feet on the ground, right? Salespeople to educate the doctors. Can you give more color in terms of your strength in that regard, or 420 Pharma's strength in Germany?
Listen,
specifically?
we have very large teams in both the UK, Germany, and now we're building out Poland, Australia, and New Zealand. So we'll have teams in all of those locations in order to work with both the pharmacies as well as other wholesalers that we're supplying to, other clinics like in the UK. So we have more than adequate amount of people. I don't have the exact head counts, but we have more than adequate enough people to handle the current demand in that industry, in that business.
Right.
It's also one of the reasons that our margins, particularly historically, have been slightly more suppressed than others in the US because we were investing in building out this platform in Europe.
Right. And look, the very last question on Europe, you talked about, 100% double growth in terms of patients. Relative to your expectations, is Europe and Germany specifically running the way you expected or ahead of your expectations?
Germany is definitely running ahead of our expectation for the first quarter. We thought that it would take more time for the patients to get through the doctor visits before they would actually be applying for a product. Right. We're now seeing that's moving a lot faster than we thought. And so we were internally about 40% above our internal targets for the second quarter. But the numbers in the third quarter and the fourth quarter start getting substantially more. As we said, we're on a run rate that's going to be somewhere between 100 and 120 million for the year.
Yeah, that's great. And look, and the very last one on Europe, when people talk about, supply from Colombia or South Africa or other parts of the world into Germany, a lot of those companies don't have the distribution there, right, set up to get to a point of sale. So it's not that simple, right? So maybe just remind people of the, let's call it the franchise or the fortress you've built and why it's not so simple for low-cost countries to just come into Germany.
So I'll give you an example. Most operators in Germany and Europe, most other wholesalers that are selling into that market, and most of the local companies are all operating in single-digit gross margins. So you don't see many operators coming out of Canada and other places that are operating at more than a 10% gross margin in this industry. Curaleaf is operating at close to a 40% gross margin, and that because we're vertical and because we have the whole supply chain and the distribution and the relationships on the ground, we're able to command a higher margin because of that investment and because of that vertical integration.
Right. Thank you for all that color. So let's move on to hemp derivatives. I guess the big picture question, discuss the thought process internally of entering this segment. Why now and not before? The risks that you looked at.
So Pablo, we looked at this sector 3 years ago, largely on my initiative. I was pushing to get into the sector in the US market. I had some, blowback from internally from a lot of my colleagues in Curaleaf because, it's a competing product to our regular product. And so a lot of the industry groups were against it. But mainly the reason we didn't get into it up until now had largely to do with the fact that we have to make sure we follow every aspect of the Farm Bill and that we're fully compliant and even more compliant than the Farm Bill because we want to set an example if you're going to do this right. The problem with that is that the supply chain was very expensive. And when we started pricing out after we commercialized these products, could we compete with a lot of the synthetic products that are out there that are actually illegal according to law? We found it very difficult to compete. However, as time went on, we were able to find suppliers and there were more players where we could actually start making products that could compete with the other products in the market. And so we chose 2 product lines for now, which is the seltzer line. We will be coming out with numerous other drinks very soon, but at the moment we have 4 seltzers and the gummy line. And so both nano, slow release and regular gummies as well. And those are products that we can be fully compliant on. And that's why we decided to get into the market at this point in time. And if you look around the United States, one thing everybody will notice is the growth is reasonably flat if you don't take into account new markets, right? So if you look at existing markets, the growth is reasonably flat in the market. Could be up 1%, could be down 1%, but it's reasonably flat, depending on how you operate. The reason for that is not that people are using less cannabis. It's because the regulated market is largely what we call the OG market, historic users, but it is not a market where new people are coming into the product lines. And so what hemp has done is it's opened up new markets with new distribution, new products They're much more broader in scope, and that's what is pressuring the regulated market. So I don't understand how we cannot be in this part of the market, even though there is criticism, because it is a major hedge and a major expansion. It's a hedge against the regulated market, and it's a major expansion of our brands and our brand awareness on shelves across the country. And so for me, it made all sense, as long as we keep to a very strict rule of abiding by the rules, playing by the rules, that I needed to get into this market. And that's why Curaleaf made the decision to go.
Understood. And then just on that point, I mean, why start from scratch and not buy a stake or buy or take a stake in one of the larger, already established hemp derivative products companies out there?
You know, if you can get into a market early enough and build your brands, and we have the infrastructure nationally to do this, why go out and pay and dilute at these current prices of where these share prices are when you can do it yourself? And so we made a decision that there was no barriers to entry for us to go out there and to build these brands. Select is one of the most well-recognized brands in the market. It's definitely the #1 vape brand according to almost every statistic in the market right now. And so we decided that we'd use one of our most recognized brands and go out with that brand and brand the products and send it out, you know, go national with it. And what's interesting, Pablo, is that distributors that we were speaking to specifically said to us, don't give us a new brand, give us Select. They told us they wanted Select.
Right.
Big national distributors said, don't give us, we've got plenty of unknown brands. We want a brand that has a good reputation for producing safe products, and we want to go with that brand. And if you remember, when the vape crisis happened, one of the first brands that the regulators came to check was Select, and our brands tested absolutely clean, and people remembered that. And these distributors said, we want the Select brand, and so that's why we went with it.
So just staying there, we're not talking about products, distribution, retail. In terms of products, where do you draw the line? Are you going to sell hemp flower? Are you going to sell vapes, or is it just gummies and seltzers and drinks for the time being?
No, we're gonna continue. So I want to keep that behind it, but we're thinking about going into as long as the supply chain is according to the Farm Bill, we're thinking about, you know, hemp cigarettes, which are obviously non-nicotine, which will be low. Again, a lot of the products we're producing are low-dose products. And we believe that the broader market, the non-OG market, not the people that are on Twitter talking about the fact that, or Reddit, that they want 50% milligrams or 1,000% milligrams. Yeah. These are people that are entering the market for the first time, and they want low-dose, micro-dose products. And that's very popular now, as you know, around the country, micro-dose products. And so that's what we're going with. And so we're thinking about going into a whole series of different products. As long as we can get the supply chain, as long as we can get commercialization right and pricing right, we will be in these products.
Right. And when you use the word synthetic, I mean, to some extent, some people would argue that synthetic hemp derivatives out there are legal based on the Farm Bill. Or do you disagree with that?
You know, listen, it depends on how you classify it. We can get into a science conversation now, Pablo, if we lose everybody. But the problem is, I'm going to make it very simple. It's the THCP, THCO. It's these synthetic Chinese-produced cannabinoids that are going into these products that are incredibly dangerous, is where the problem is. Right.
Understood. And then in terms of distribution, when you're talking about national distributors, at the retail level, are you going to be selling just in dispensaries, or also could I find some of these products at a convenience store, gas station, like your Select Bites?
We're not going with dispensaries. As you know, we have an agreement. We just shipped today to a big shipment to DoorDash. We're working with them on a national basis. Yep. We're also going through our own D2C through the hemp company, our direct-to-consumer line, as well as through regional and national distributors. Now, all of this is slowly getting rolled out. We're not in a huge rush. The first thing we did was we launched direct-to-consumer and through DoorDash. The next is we're going to start launching in stores through regional distributors, and then we're also negotiating working with national distributors. So our goal is to be everywhere we can be from a legal perspective on all door fronts across the country. And what's really good is our gating, the gating that we've put together of having to produce an ID online, and we're using very good software for that. And we've checked this over the last week since we started selling. It's really, really working. And I can tell you, Pablo, The numbers are impressive. I'm going to say that I'm not going to give you exact numbers. Maybe we'll talk about it on our earnings call. But the early orders are looking very, very good. Now I know there's a little bit of hype and it might be a little high, but I'm very encouraged by what we're seeing.
Right. And when you say big national distributors, Boris, we're talking about like, these large wines and spirits like Reyes or beer distributors, or Glazer wines and spirits. You're talking about those type of guys.
Correct.
Wow. And obviously, okay. And then your website, thehempcompany.com, is that going to sell only your own products, or someday it could be like a platform where you sell other third-party products, or just Curaleaf products?
Our goal is to eventually, over the next couple of months, we're looking at it, open it up to we're in conversations with everybody. We want a self-governance platform where the industry acts responsibly, and the gates to get on the hemp company site are going to be high, but as long as you meet the product supply chain, you got all the COAs. As you see all of our products, you can see the testing online. We got microbial testing, we got THC testing, we got all, pesticide testing. We've got everything there. So as long as you can do those things with your products, and you're taking this market share, so we're going to allow those products on that site. We want this to be a site and a distribution network for all hemp products in the market that meet the right rules, requirements, regulations, and be on that site. So yes, we're going to open it up.
Now, for those that are not so familiar with the hemp derivative segment, I mean, I think you've said and other people have said it's as big as cannabis, right? So another $30 billion in sales, $60 billion in total. But headset BDS don't track the sector so well. Is it a very fragmented sector, or is it already consolidated, in your opinion, hemp derivatives in general?
It's very, very fragmented at this point in time. There's literally thousands of small players. I would say 80% of whom are not, if not more, not following the full rules of the hemp law. There has been very little pushback at the moment on them, but we're hopeful that having a responsible player like Curaleaf enter will help move the market and move the dialogue. One of the problems has been that there's been a friction between the hemp market and the cannabis market. And what we're trying to do with this is bring those two together to work together with the federal government on fair, equitable, transparent regulation for the whole sector. And we hope that this will do it. I have gotten numerous inbounds from hemp farmers, from hemp producers saying, we're so happy this is happening, that these two industries can come together and work together.
So, I mean, obviously, if someone said to you that you're too late to the party, that there's too many hemp gummy brands out there and too many hemp seltzers, you would disagree with that?
Yeah, listen, I think this whole industry is still at a very early stage. I know it's difficult to see that given all the problems this industry has faced. But listen, I like to bring this up an example, and I'm not comparing, I know people criticize, I'm not comparing myself to Jeff Bezos in any way. I've got a little bit more hair than he does, not a lot more, but what I wanted to say is that it took him, he started out as a bookstore. It took him years to get to where Amazon is today. And look where it is today. It's in so many different segments. And so I personally think this is a segment that's I'm always thinking about Curaleaf 5 to 10 years out. That's my job. Matt's job is to think about Curaleaf quarter out. My job is to think about where Curaleaf is going to be, 3 to 5 to 10 years out. And so the European investment, this investment is all about, making sure we've got growth catalysts that are going to continue to take this business forward.
Right, thank you. Look, last set of questions on hemp, particularly around lobby. And again, you were on the Dime podcast recently with Brian, great conversation. You said something there about the hemp lobby really being bigger and stronger than cannabis. And I was surprised to hear that. And you also talked about the possibility that both lobbies could work together. Maybe expand on that.
Well, that's what I was just telling you earlier, so the hemp lobby, when I talk about the hemp lobby, let's be very specific. I'm mainly talking about the farmers.
Farmers, yeah.
So the hemp companies are still very small and fragmented and have no money. The product companies, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's the farmers, right? And the farmers, they don't only farm hemp, they farm many other things. And the agriculture industry in the United States is very powerful. And if you just look at, I think the perfect example of how powerful they are, look at the decision made in Florida. It's almost outrageous, right? On the one hand, you've got DeSantis actively lobbying against adult use regulated cannabis, fully regulated adult use cannabis, tested, regulated, transparent. And on the other hand, you have him veto a law that was going to try and regulate the hemp industry and allow these guys to sell across the state in every single store because the hemp farmers are so powerful. And so that gives you an example of how just powerful the agriculture industry is. You've seen it also in North Carolina. North Carolina doesn't even have a regulated cannabis industry, but they have a hemp industry, and they're just passing legislation now to that effect. And they tried to pass cannabis legislation with it, and the cannabis legislation was turned down for the hemp legislation. It shows you how crazy some of these decisions are, but it also shows you how the US works on interest groups, and the more powerful they are, the more money they have, the more they get. And that's what's happened with the hemp industry.
Right. Look, I mean, and I think about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, you tweeted something that you wanted hemp derivatives to, when all this discussion about the Farm Bill and the amendment that was being discussed, you made the argument that you wanted the industry to remain a valid industry, hemp derivatives, but to be regulated and sold through dispensaries. But unless I misunderstood, it seems to me that you've changed your view a little bit on that. You're looking for broader distribution.
That's inaccurate, slightly inaccurate.
Okay.
What I said was I want the THCA, which is the psychoactive property of both of those products, right? Both cannabis and to be regulated the same way. Whether it's dispensaries or whether it's broader national market, I just want there to be equal treatment of both. Right. And that's my goal, to try and join together with the hemp farmers and the hemp industry and the cannabis industry and lobby for equal treatment of the industry together. And I think that together, listen, $30 billion industry with, call it 400,000 employees, $60 billion industry with, call it almost 1 million employees, given the wider distribution of hemp products, is a massive, powerful force in the US already. And so the cat's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle, whatever you want to use. And I believe we've got to work together to try and get our archaic system, regulation system in place so that this can be a safe, well-distributed product that age gates minors and that addresses, THC levels and everything else, and can work for everyone, including the states and the federal government.
Right. And then look, just 2 quick questions on hemp before we move on, coming through the Twitter feed. One of them is that, how much can you stretch Select, right? It seems to be in many categories, understood in the case of gummies and vape, of course. But in the case of drinks, you're competing with High Noon and many other established drink brands. Why take Select there and not come out with a new brand? Just short answer.
So I think I answered that earlier, but yes, Select today operates basically in 2 categories, vapes and gummies. And the gummy line has been not very, like the Jams gummy line at Curaleaf is much bigger. Select is the more powerful slow release gummies and or more powerful nano gummies. But the reason we went with Select is because the distributors asked for Select. They said, we need a brand that is recognized nationally, and they looked at the numbers, and a brand that has been recognized to be safe, which they looked at as well. That's why we went with Select.
Yeah. And last one on hemp, someone asking, do you expect that we will have a farm bill this year, or are we talking really about 2025?
No, there'll be, I think I've said this before, there will be no farm bill this year. There's going to be no more bills this year. So there's not going to be a farm bill. There's way too many disagreements. It's going to be kicked to 25. Right.
Okay. So now we move on to a rescheduling conversation. There's a lot to cover, but let's start with, the debate last Thursday. Everyone says Biden lost big time. Is that bad for cannabis?
So let me start with Biden. So I actually think that what happened there, although I feel very bad for the president and the way the debate went for him, although, it is what it is. I think it gets pretty obvious to the country about, the state of the health and all that kind of things. But again, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to get involved in that aspect. I think the outcome of that was that, maybe President Biden isn't the right candidate. I personally think he's not going to step down, but say that he does. Any other candidate that's going to come out from the Democrats is actually going to be more pro-cannabis than Biden is himself. So in fact, in my opinion, even if they do change out the president today to another candidate, God forbid he has a health issue or something like that, I personally think that's more positive, and I don't want to be a cynic, but that's more positive for the cannabis industry than even himself, right? Biden has always been a reluctant man for cannabis. He has moved in that direction because his party's there, his constituency is there, and so he has moved that way. And frankly, in the last, call it 8-9 months, he's been very proactive with tweets and comments and things like that. But it is not a natural thing for him to be moving ahead with. The other candidates, of which, you've got Newsom, you've got the governor of Michigan, you've got Michelle Obama. If you look at their records, they're all pro-cannabis, very vocally and openly. Both governors have legal cannabis in their state. Michelle Obama has actually written on the subject. So whoever, though, it's definitely going to be more, it's going to be better for us than it is with even Biden. Obviously on the other side of it is Trump. There is no official statement from Trump yet, but from everything, obviously I'm a registered Republican. Don't shoot me for it, but I am. I'm a New York, call it a New York Republican, which means I'm a moderate Republican. I will tell you that from my contact with most people in that administration, they are not going to go against Schedule 3. They actually think it's a good thing because it'll allow for finally research and testing to determine how this product is. What does it look like? I'm going to give it, because this is a good way to enter the other subject, which is the Chevron deference. If you look at cannabis was originally put into the CSA, the Controlled Substances Act, back in the late 1960s. And when it was put in, it was thrown in many ways by the recommendation of one deputy undersecretary of state, who said, you know what, we don't know anything about this plant, and so let's put it in there. But the CSA allows for science to be done, and when we do the research and development, we can always reverse that decision if we find out that it's safe. Years later, the research by a bipartisan committee was actually done, and the recommendation was to legalize cannabis. But it was literally the decision of Nixon, and if you look at the details, it was actually an anti-Semitic decision where he, for some reason, thought that cannabis was being pushed by Jews. I don't know why he said that, but he did say that, and that's why we didn't get it approved, even though it was recommended for legalization, even back in the early 1970s. And then we moved into, now 50 years later, the science has been done by the FDA and the HSS. And the science has been recommended to reschedule cannabis. And so if you look, I've done a lot of work over the weekend on this issue of the Chevron deference. If you look at it, it looks as though science is not the issue that this is addressing. It's addressing the legal issue rather than the science issue. This is a science issue that's taking place, right? Cannabis never had the science done originally when it was put in the CSA as a Schedule I drug. And now you have the science that's done. And we also think it'll be almost impossible for anyone to get standing, given that you're not selling cannabis on the back of this. You're allowing for research on the back of Schedule 3. So we think that we're in very, very good territory. And what Chevron deference does is it also puts pressure on the regulators like the DEA not to make decisions like they made in the past that were not based on science. And I actually think it strengthens, for instance, the Bois-Schuler case. It strengthens the Bois-Schuler case because what it says is that these agencies cannot make single-handed decisions like this without looking at the facts. And so in many ways, although this adds some uncertainty to everything, in the case of cannabis, and I've consulted with Washington, D.C. lawyers, experts on the APA, which is the Administrative Procedure Act, which this addresses. That act came out in 1942. It was then revised in 1984 by the Chevron deference case, and now in 2024, it's having a reversal. The big problem is going to be generally is that the courts are going to be overwhelmed by this. This is a much bigger issue than cannabis. But in the case of cannabis, because this decision was made on the basis of science, we believe that we're in a very strong position. And that's, by the way, what Scott Gottlieb today, who was I saw him on CNBC this morning, the ex-head of the FDA, he came out and said basically the same thing I'm saying now, that my counsel has advised me that I can say on this call.
All right, no, that's very clear. But look, I mean, just to stay, we want to dig deeper there. In terms of CRA, there's some confusion out there in terms of the Congressional Review Act. The cutoff date is pretty much August 6th. And the final rule, it's not going to be out before August 6th, right? So we get into let's talk about this scenario, and this is all hypothetical, right? We are in the debate last Thursday. Let's say President Biden is still the candidate. He loses. It's a landslide for Republicans. They take control of the Senate, of the House. But you're saying even a scenario of, I don't want to say use the word MAGA in negative ways, but, a very conservative, religious conservative MAGA type of control of the House, the Senate, and of course, President Trump potentially in the White House. they could potentially want to reverse the rescheduling. You're saying no, because it polls well and that will happen. Because that's the only scenario. In other scenario, I agree, goes through.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fact. Let's not talk about what they want. They need a super majority to reverse this decision in the Senate. There is no way, even if the Republicans win the Senate, there's no way they're gonna have a super majority. That's the issue. So there's no way this gets reversed. It has to be a super majority.
Right. I thought it was 50.1%. It's just
not on this decision. To reverse this, it's a super majority. At least that's what my counsel is telling me. So I'm not a lawyer. I want to preface by saying I'm not a lawyer in this meeting. But that is what our counsel is saying, it has to be a super majority.
All right. And then just staying on the idea, there are parts of the rescheduling process that we're in right now that we all know it was 30 days for hearing, to call for a hearing, 60-day period for the public comment period ending July 22nd. But there are parts of the process that have an undefined timeline, right? When does the DA, DOJ decide where there will be hearings, the length of the hearings, the time the administrative law judge takes to write the review after the hearings, time for the DOJ and DA to write and publish a final rule. And do you think that based on all those undefined timelines that we can have a final rule before the election?
So I don't think that we're going to have an administrative hearing. Not if the goal of the administration is to get this done before the election. Don't forget, there is a political angle to this, right? Sure. It's not only a science angle, there is a political angle. I mean, the science angle is, the anecdotal evidence, not talking about the science, has been people have using cannabis since the Egyptians. They found it in Egyptian tombs and nobody's ever died from it. So I think that's the background, the sort of general background. But the reality is that I don't think that if they go into an ALJ hearing, this could take years, right? It could take years to get through an ALJ hearing. So I don't believe that they're going to go that route at this point in time, but they could. If they go that route, it could be as short as 30 days, but it could be as long as 3 years. So I think it's very difficult if they go into an ALJ hearing, I think it's an open process. We'd have to understand what the goal is and how fast they want to get through it. But my view is that would be a negative. And the reason I don't think they're going to go to the ALJ hearing is there's no one that has standing. You have to prove harm, that you specifically, the group that's asking for the hearing, has been harmed. Who is harmed from moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3? There's no sales allowed. There's no recreational sales allowed under that. So it is purely a medical transfer from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 for research and on the tax issues. There's nobody except the budget. One could argue the budget's harmed because of taxes, but that's why you had the OMB review it and approve it.
Right.
So I'm not sure who's harmed.
Yeah, and I could add to that it remains federally illegal, right? So states that don't want it could say that, well, we're being harmed, but they are not going to be forced to do it. So it's
exactly. So
it's
I don't see a reason for the ALJ hearing, but I cannot tell you whether they will or won't. That's really up to the DEA to make that decision. And I'm not going to speak for the DEA in any way.
Right. So again, you don't believe there will be an ALJ hearing. That's your base case scenario. And in that, following that timeline and that line of thought, you expect that we will have a final ruling out before the election then?
I think on that basis, I think it's very possible with all the other things that they have to do that they could get something out by October, yes.
Right, okay. And then just, so we've covered all the potential negative scenarios, right? And going back to Chevron, so the idea is that once the final rule is published in the Federal Register, there are 30 days for it to be implemented. That's when the judicial reviews or judicial challenges may come in, which we all expect will come in, right? But you're making the argument that your lawyers are telling you, based on the Supreme Court decision around Chevron, that because this is based on science, right? That based on the merit of science, that there will not that there's no basis for a judge to place a stay on the process. I mean, the judge could review the matter for 3 years.
I think there will be attempts to challenge. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
There will be attempts to challenge.
Yeah.
The question now is, especially under this new rule of the Chevron deference, is you can now shop for judges. You can go to specific states where they're against it, and you can try and shop for judges. But the real question is that, one is, does anyone have standing? Okay, say a judge in Texas decides, yes, you have standing. Right. The next thing is it a case or is it an injunction? If it's a case that goes forward, then Schedule 3 is in and they can sue for years to come. That's not a problem, but we get the benefits of Schedule 3.
Right.
If he puts an injunction, then we go to an upper court, and in the upper court, that injunction is likely to be lifted, right? Because the upper court won't be in the same jurisdiction. It'll be in another jurisdiction. And the standing there will be much more difficult to prove than it was in a local district court like in Texas. So my view is that once the rule is written and out there, there may be challenges, but I believe that we will get it, and we'll get it reasonably quickly on the basis of standing. And the threshold to get an injunction is very, very high, right? To go out and enjoin this whole thing based on science, you really got to be, it's going to be an aggressive move by a judge. I'm not saying it can't happen, but then I do think it'll get reversed in the higher court. And I think we could move for a very quick relief on the upper court because it's holding up a massive industry. I've been through these cases before, for instance, in places like New Jersey, where we had to challenge the regulator. They ended up actually settling with us, but the minute they realized we were going to go to the upper courts, they settled because they knew that wouldn't hold. Some of the decisions they were making wouldn't hold in the upper court. So I think we're in pretty good shape, but that doesn't mean that there won't be challenges. I do think that there will be people that will try to challenge this decision.
Yeah, no, I agree. So just on that point, I guess bigger picture, right? So, I mean, not that my opinion matters here, but I agree with all the scenarios you're talking about here. But stocks are not reflecting that. So what would you say to investors?
Listen, I think these stocks are so manipulated by a very small group of people because of the lack of liquidity that I don't think the share prices today reflect in any way the real value of these businesses. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is that you and I both know that the real problem is access by investors to this market. And even though, look at, for instance, Curaleaf. Curaleaf has put in place everything it needed to. We went uplisted on a major exchange. We put in custody with State Street, with Bank of New York, with Morgan Stanley, with Goldman Sachs. You can buy our stock if you're an institutional investor, anybody. But as I have been out there since that uplisting, I've been out there since January talking to these large investors. They have one position only. We want to see some guidance from FinCEN that we can invest in this sector. Once we get that guidance, we're going to invest in the sector. But that guidance isn't going to come until we get a DOJ memo on the back of Schedule 3, and then on the back of the DOJ memo, FinCEN can come out with guidance, just like they did when we had the coal memo. So I think we need to be patient and we need to wait, and that's when you're going to see the big investors. The problem with this sector is the largest investors in this sector are the management teams. The second largest investors in this sector are retail investors. And the institutional participation at this point in time, I can name you the institutions on one hand that have significant stakes, right? It's the index fund and it's a couple of hedge funds that are out there. But nobody else is invested in the sector. Retail produces a lot of volatility. The rules in Canada on short selling are not buttoned down. So we are exposed dramatically to these small to medium-sized hedge funds that are running these stocks up and down on a daily basis and deciding what to do with them. So this current price action does not reflect the value of these companies, but we're stuck here until such time as we can get the Treasury, which is FinCEN, to give out guidance to investors. Because if you're a large investor, if you're a BlackRock, if you're a Fidelity, if you're a T. Rowe, a Mundi, all these investors, Wellington that I've been talking to, they're going to tell you their compliance needs guidance from FinCEN whether they can invest in the sector. So that's what we need. It's not, everybody's saying it's the exchanges. It's right. The exchanges help, don't get me wrong, but it's not the exchanges, right? BlackRock can invest in Nigerian oil companies on the Lagos exchange. That's not the problem. The problem is that these capital structures are not anchored with institutional investors. Right. And so every day it's in and out, short-term money, and that's what's causing this crazy volatility.
Right. So there you brought the subject to a call memo too, right? So my concern is that obviously rescheduling is part of an administrative process. That's very clear. How it's done. In the case of a call memo too, we're all assuming that the White House executive branch understands that needs to be in place also for rescheduling to be fully implemented, and you have a listing, you have the FinCEN rules and so on. But isn't there a risk that, a new attorney general, let's say a Trump White House, they don't reverse rescheduling, but you have another Jeff Sessions that comes in and takes out, reverses the call memo too, or that's going too far?
Pablo, what's interesting is I recently learned that Trump and his people were very disappointed with Sessions' decision to revoke the Cole memo because it created a lot of uncertainty around this, around cannabis. I'm not sure from the right perspective, they were concerned that it's going to become an illegal industry again, which they were partially right. That's what happened. So I don't think that there'll be a reversal because there needs to be, listen, these products have become prolific. They're everywhere now. They need to regulate this market. They need to come to a conclusion. I think we're much closer to federal regulation than you think. I even think that you might get regulation if you don't have a Biden administration, further regulation, even under a Trump administration, because they know they need to make this thing work. Now, I don't think they're going to move to regulation outside of the state system until they've done their research and development. So I think what the Cole memo, again, this is my view. This is not, I think this is the prevalent view, but it's not, it's my view, is that I believe that what they're going to come out with is to say that the industry is, for at least for the next 5 years, is going to continue to be regulated on a state-by-state basis until such time as the FDA can rule right, together with the DEA, on what the rules are going to be after they've done the research and development, and mainly the research to understand the effects of these cannabinoids on the human body. And I think that's going to take some time to get done. They're going to give out dollars to universities, to hospitals, research universities, in order to be able to do this research. I think that research will be done, maybe even by pharma companies as well as cannabis companies. And then they'll collect that research and they'll write the rules in the back of that. Look, they haven't been able to write the rules on CBD for 5 years. So it's going to take at least that long. And they're going to need to have some framework. And the best framework and the safest framework that we know of today is the state regulated framework, as we all know.
No, look, I mean, I know we're going to run into the hour here soon, but just two quick questions here. In terms of the David Boyes lawsuit, number one, why didn't you join that lawsuit from the beginning? And then number two, you saw a decision today. How do you think that plays out through the appeal process?
Listen, I think we're all doing our part in the industry, right? You know, Cresco and Curaleaf have been the leaders in Washington and everything to do in DC. We spent an enormous amount of money, and some of the other players are funding that lawsuit. We're 100% supportive of the lawsuit, but you know, we all have to manage our expenses, and we have spent millions of dollars on Washington DC between, you know, Cresco and Curaleaf. And so, you know, that was our thing. I'm also spending, as everybody knows, millions of dollars in Florida. So Curaleaf, one can't blame Curaleaf for not spending money on, we're a leader on regulation in states and in the federal government. Let somebody else take the Boyce-Schuller case. But I'm very supportive of it, and I'm very supportive of everybody working on it, and I keep in touch with that team. I think the decision that was made today was the best thing that could happen, right? The worst thing that could happen is if we started to litigate this thing in a local court. We want to get as high up as fast as possible to get to the Supreme Court. So the fact that they turned this down is very good for us. It's very good for the industry, and I congratulate the team that's managing this. I think they've done a good job.
Okay. Look, and regarding 280E, I'm not going to get into the details because I know you can't comment much in terms of what you may or may not do in the future. But there was that IRS press release last week in terms of the way they are thinking about 280E. Any big picture comments you can make? Just big picture.
Yeah, listen, did anybody believe that they weren't going to say that, right? I'm sure they're inundated with tax refunds at this point in time. They're waiting for this rescheduling to go, so they had to protect their position because that's the law. They would have been blamed if they didn't protect their position. So I am not at all surprised by the position of the IRS on this. We expected this to happen. It's not new news for us. I don't think it changes the fundamental argument. The industry was always going. We knew we were in conflict with the IRS on this issue. We're making the arguments. We have you know, the industry has legal opinions, law firms. This is yet another challenge on this, what I would call is the most unconstitutional thing that happens, is this 280 tax that's put on this industry. So this is right up the alley of what I expected. Nothing surprising.
Just moving on to, you know, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And again, thank you for your time here, Boris. Just discuss your expansion plans in each of those three markets. And let's start with Florida, right? Like how quickly do you expand? What type of numbers are we looking at if we get the 60% vote in Florida?
Yes, listen, I can't talk about the numbers of the industry, but what I would say to you is that, you know, there, you know, different companies, our view at Curaleaf, it's going to double. I know that TruLeaf's view is it's going to triple. Maybe it's somewhere in between there because of all the tourist traffic. It's going to be a big market if it gets approved. Curaleaf will be prepared for the adult use. So we will have 85 stores opened up by the time we're at 64 or something like that right now. We will have 85 stores open by the time the program launches. We'll also have the capacity in place to compete with the number one player. We currently have a massive expansion underway that we started 2 years ago, but mothballed because we wanted to see where the legislation was going to come out. Now that we're moving forward and we have a high confidence that we'll reach the threshold, we now have decided to finish those cultivation facilities. So we're in full gear. Our first harvest should be coming out of our large cultivation facilities somewhere around May to early June of next year, which is right in time for the launch of the program, which is expected around July if it passes.
Right. So on that point, if it passes, some people say, May 5th next year. Other people say it may take until 2026 because of AG and the governor, probably delaying things. And any quick thoughts on that, Florida?
Well, the one thing I will say about Governor DeSantis is he may be aggressively against this right now, but I will say another thing that he has said very openly, and I've heard it, that if it passes the will of the people, he will integrate the program. And if you had the governor of Arizona was against it as well, and he was the fastest to implement adult use after it passed. So Republican governors tend to be pro-business. So if the will of the people is met and it's passed, they tend to move quickly. Now, this could be an exception to the rule, but so far, I have to say that Governor DeSantis has never tried to clamp down on the medical program. They could have done lots of things since he's become governor to slow down the growth in the medical. They never did. They were very supportive. We're very comfortable with the way Florida's regulated the medical program. So I don't believe that he would change for this, for the adult use program. So we're very comfortable that they'll move ahead.
Now, in the case of Pennsylvania and Florida, there are no caps on store ownerships, right? Is this not the right time to buy other operators in states like those two, especially when they give you access to states where they're not present?
It's much cheaper given we have time to open stores, much cheaper. So we're opening stores rather than buying stores.
Right. Okay. And just quickly on Ohio, just remind people where you are. You don't have the 5 stores there, but how do you get to the maximum in Ohio?
Oh, so we have in the works, we'll have the full 8 stores within 12 months open and operational that we're allowed. We have our 2 stores. We have a very productive, one of our most, if not most productive grow in Ohio. We are the premier grower there. So we're very comfortable on the wholesale. We have 2 very strong stores. We've got 3 more that are going to be opening up very, very soon, within the next, call it 6 months. And then we have the other 3 that we'll get with the adult use license that'll open up as well. So Curaleaf is well on its way to the 8 stores that we have to have. And we feel comfortable that, we'll also have a very strong wholesale business. Look,
and you were very detailed in Florida in the case of, 85 stores and cultivation expansion. Can you give some color in terms of Pennsylvania, your plans there? If we get,
we don't need to expand in Pennsylvania. We have our grow. We have 2 grow facilities. We have more than enough capacity in Pennsylvania to meet adult use demand. We have a growth facility that we can expand if we want to even further, but we already are very, very significantly expanded. It's one of our best markets. So we're in very good shape. Now, can we add more stores? You said it's unlimited stores. It's not quite that in Pennsylvania. There is some ambiguity as to whether you can go above the 18 stores. We know that Trulieve has, I think, 19 or 20. But we still have to work with the regulator on that. That's one state where you could see us expand further on the retail side.
Last question at the state level. In the case of New York, can you give an update on how the wholesale is going there, or is it still too early to judge?
So, New York, as you know, we were only able to enter on January 1st. Curaleaf has a very strong, I think out of the MSOs, we're the leader in that. We're opening up stores every single day. But it takes time. And I think that what you'll see those numbers again come through in the 3rd and 4th quarter. We saw very strong growth in the 2nd quarter, but it's still small numbers compared to what we think we'll see. We're really starting to pick up steam here at the end of June, May and June. And I think going into the 3rd and 4th quarter, you'll start to see that expand and become very, very significant. But wholesale markets take a while, right? And even in New Jersey, where we're the absolute leader, like in New York, it took us a year to get to, significant numbers. And I think these markets take a little bit of time to develop, right? And so we're moving very quickly. We're building relationships. We've got a very large wholesale team on the ground. I think we've got 12 people that are selling. My rule is my sales team has to visit every store in the state, which I think now is 188, at least once a week. So my people are very busy. They're out there. They're building relationships. We just had 2 major events where we showcased our products in New York, one last Friday, one the Friday before that. And we had, in the first one, we had over 250 potential clients there. This last one, we had almost 200 clients there. So we are really, really moving forward, building those relationships and opening up those storefronts for us.
That's great. Look, Boris, I know we're almost out of time. I want to jump around here with questions. One question that keeps coming across is the idea of at what point do you get a CPG partner, right? BATs with OGI, Altria with Kronos, and I could go on with the list, obviously Constellation Brands with Canopy Growth. How do you think about bringing in a CPG partner at some point, or you don't need that right now?
Well, listen, I always look at these things, right? I've been in this business, not only cannabis, but in the entrepreneurial business for a very long time. You know, you bring in a CPG partner when they can add some kind of value to you, right? And today, I don't see anyone adding significant value to what we're doing. Right now, we're very comfortable with how we're building out our brands. We're very comfortable that we can hire the people to the extent we need. We don't need to sell a piece of the company. Plus, I don't think the valuations are right in the industry for what would, in effect, be a partial capital increase or exit or dilution, right? So from my perspective right now is not the right time to do it. Right now, I've got my head down and I'm executing. And that's what I'm focused on, not running around and trying to bring in a CPG partner before it's time.
Right. And then just on Curaleaf International, you own 68.5% of it. You will probably want to fund your expansion overseas. How do you think about, Curaleaf International? Do you spin off another percentage, another stake? Do you list it in an overseas exchange? Could you actually list it in NASDAQ? It's operating in markets where cannabis is federally legal. How do you think about that?
We're going to see what happens in the US with this rescheduling. We'll make decisions on the back of that. But at the moment, we do have a call option on that. You will see us over the next 6 months consolidate that stake to 100% ownership in the European business, which will then be much easier for us to do things after we own 100% of it. So we have a call option on our local partner at the end of this year, early next year. At that point in time, we will consolidate that stake into Curaleaf. And at that point in time, hopefully we'll have more information. If for some reason we don't get Schedule 3, we always have the option then to spin out the European business and do a listing on a major exchange and bring in a partner if we want to. So we've got a lot of options open to us in Europe. Right now, however, Europe has just turned cash flow positive. So we're very, very excited about that. And we're really focused on that.
Yeah, and one last one. I mean, here, obviously, from my perspective, Curaleaf is a lot more focused organization over the last few years. Yes, people could say you're going into hemp, you're going into Europe, but that's part of this overall long-term vision, right? But along the way, you went into California or Colorado, and then you walked away from there. Any decisions that you might have, in hindsight, that you might regret of what you've done over the past 5 years?
Pablo, everybody makes mistakes when they're building businesses, and businesses get shut down. Again, Amazon has probably shut down more businesses than they've got operating. So those markets a mistake? California was definitely a mistake. The rules in California are such that you virtually can't make money in California. Not if you're following all the rules and paying all the taxes. And the industry in California, from my perspective, is bankrupt. So I think it was the right decision for Curaleaf to exit that market, take our medicine, write it off. Same thing with Colorado, Oregon, and Michigan. We decided that all those markets were just too low margin. They were hurting our margin profile. And so we decided to exit those markets. I think it was the right decision. Those markets would have to change dramatically to see us re-enter in any time. And at the moment, we don't see any reason to do that. But listen, you don't win unless you risk. And risk means sometimes you're going to have wins and you're going to have failures. The most important thing is to have more wins than failures. And I think we're on our way there, very much so. And but we're not perfect. We make mistakes like anybody else.
That's great. Look, I mean, I thank you very much, Boris. I mean, there were a couple of questions that came up, but I want to answer them. Someone asked about 280E. In the case of hemp, 280E doesn't apply to hemp derivatives. Someone asked about, your TSX listing, how it's gone. I think you touched on that. So I think we've covered all the bases here. So Boris, thank you very much for joining us today at this hour. And also thanks to everyone that joined through Zoom and through Spaces. So any closing remarks and maybe, a pitch to investors, right? That are those retail investors out there that are maybe struggling or a little bit frustrated with the way that these stocks have performed.
Listen, as I think probably the largest investor in the sector, I feel for everyone that's struggling in this industry right now. However, I think that if you have a longer term view and a lot of investors had long-term views on the tech industry. If you remember, the tech industry in 2000 and 2001 went through a very similar drawdown that we're seeing today. And then after that drawdown, it took a long time for that industry to recover. But the winners are those companies that stayed focused, that grew, that expanded, and weren't afraid to take risks. And those are the companies today, the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, and everybody that are successful. I believe that Curaleaf will be one of those companies in the cannabis space. I think we are well on our way into that period of time. And I think that hopefully the returns will come much sooner than you think. But, you know, you got to work for that. Nothing comes easy. People have gotten too used to making money very, very fast. When you build companies, it takes time. And Curaleaf, I'm building Curaleaf to be here to stay. I'm not building it to sell. I'm building it to compete, win, and hopefully make people a lot of money. So that's my pitch.
That's great. Thank you, Boris, very much for your time again. And thanks everyone for joining. Everyone have a good day. Thank you.